By dawn, the bride would be missing, and the groom would be begging. But right now, the ballroom still looked like a dream someone paid too much money to own. Crystal chandeliers burned like frozen stars above white roses and silk ribbons. The aisle was a perfect line of light. Guests smiled in quiet admiration, the kind that comes when everyone in the room knows they're witnessing wealth, not love. The string quartet softened the air with something romantic, something carefully chosen to sound expensive. And the bride stood at the front like she belonged to the moment. Like she'd always belonged here. Except her hands were too still, too controlled, like she was holding her body together by force. The officiant lifted his hands gently. The murmurs faded. Cameras rose. Phones angled. The groom, young, polished, handsome in that perfectly tailored way, turned toward her like he'd already won. He looked proud, like this wedding was proof of status. Like marrying her sealed the final deal. Then the doors behind them opened. Not softly, not politely. The sound didn't just travel, it cut through the music like a blade. One heavy push. Breathless pause. And in that pause the entire room felt it. A shift. That invisible change people only recognize when danger walks in wearing calm. The quartet stumbled. One violin note dragged too long and died. Heads turned. At first people thought it was some late guest. A dramatic entrance. Friend with bad timing. But the staff near the doors didn't smile. They didn't ask questions. Their faces went blank, trained and terrified. A man stepped inside, framed by cold air and two shadows behind him. Black coat, hands bare. No visible weapon. No rush. He walked like the room already belonged to him. The bride's breathing didn't change. At least not outwardly. But something in her posture tightened, so small no one would notice unless they were looking for it. Unless they had spent their life reading fear the way others read headlines. The groom frowned, confusion flashing quickly into irritation. He leaned slightly toward the officiant like he was about to complain, like he was about to order someone to handle it. But the man kept walking. Each step made the atmosphere heavier, as if every guest suddenly realized they had never actually been safe, only allowed to feel safe. People whispered names. Some guessed business rivals. Some thought it was a celebrity. Some thought it was security. Then someone nearer the front recognized him. Their glass slipped from their fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was sharp, humiliating, loud. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even look down. His gaze remained forward, fixed on the altar like it was a destination he had already planned to reach. The groom finally stepped off the platform, his jaw tightening. "Excuse me." The man's eyes met his for the first time. And the groom stopped talking. He didn't stumble. He didn't fall. He just paused. As if his voice had been stolen. As if instinct whispered something his pride couldn't understand yet. The man didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to show anger. His calm was worse than rage because it meant he wasn't here to argue. He was here because something was already decided. His shoes clicked once more. He reached the front row. Then the mother of the groom, dressed in diamonds, smiling seconds ago, looked up and went pale. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Her fingers clutched her purse like it could protect her. That's when the bride finally moved. Not much, just a tiny shift of weight. Like she was preparing to run without actually stepping away. Like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life and still wasn't ready for it. The Mafia boss stepped into the aisle, right where all the cameras could see him. Right where every guest could witness the interruption. And he spoke one word. "Stop." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. But it landed like a verdict. Even the officiant froze. The groom's mouth opened again, anger returning, until the boss lifted his hand slightly. Not as a threat. Not as a weapon. Just a gesture of absolute control. The groom swallowed whatever he was about to say. Because suddenly it didn't feel like his wedding anymore. Felt like a courtroom. And the man who interrupted wasn't asking for permission. The bride's eyes stayed forward, locked on the officiant's chest, refusing to look at the aisle behind her like looking would make it real. Like looking would break the illusion she'd built with lace and makeup and a false smile. The boss took one more step, stopping close enough that she could feel him without seeing him. Close enough that the air between them turned cold. His voice lowered, controlled. "Lift your veil." The bride's throat tightened. The groom snapped, finally finding his spine. "Don't touch her." But his warning sounded weak even to himself. Because the bride moved before anyone could stop her. Low. Careful. Like every finger weighed 100 pounds. She lifted the veil. Her face appeared, beautiful, composed, eyes too steady. The room exhaled, as if relieved it was just a normal bride. Then the Mafia boss's expression changed. Not anger. Not lust. Not surprise in the way people expected. It was something deeper. Something that turned his face pale in a way power never should. Like he had just seen the past standing in front of him. Wearing white. And in that first unbearable silence after her veil lifted, everyone realized the wedding had never been the main event. This recognition was. He didn't move, he didn't speak again, he just stared at her the way a man stares at something he buried years ago, something he never expected to breathe again. The ballroom stayed frozen around them, but the bride's face held that practiced ceremonial smile. The kind women learn when they've spent their whole lives being told to stay pleasant no matter what is happening inside them. Her lips curved softly, her chin lifted, eyes shining under the lights like she belonged in a magazine. But her hands were shaking beneath the bouquet. Tiny tremors. Almost invisible. Only the Mafia boss saw it, and something in him tightened, slow and brutal, like a memory clawing its way out of a locked room. The groom's confusion curdled into outrage. He looked from the bride to the stranger, trying to reclaim control with his posture, with his name, with the fact that this was supposed to be his moment. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, forcing a laugh that sounded wrong. "This is a private event." The Mafia boss didn't even turn his head. The groom's words landed like dust against stone. The bride's smile twitched at the corner, struggling to stay alive. The guests were whispering now. Low, frightened waves spreading through the rows, phones were still raised. But the energy had shifted from excitement to hunger. People loved scandals. They loved watching power collide. And right now, power was standing 2 feet from the bride, breathing steadily, looking like he'd just lost something he didn't. No, he still wanted. The boss finally spoke again, not to the groom, his voice was calm, but there was a fracture under it, a faint roughness like he hadn't used that part of himself in years. "You're alive." It wasn't a compliment, it wasn't relief, it sounded like disbelief and accusation. Wrapped into one quiet sentence. The bride's eyes flickered. Just once, the smile held, but her gaze betrayed her, darting over his shoulder toward the doors, like she was calculating distance, like she was imagining escape routes inside a room filled with flowers and silk. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "Congratulations," she said softly, voice sweet enough for the microphones to catch, polite enough to fool strangers. "You've made your point, now you can leave." A few guests laughed nervously, thinking it was part of the drama, part of the show. But the boss didn't leave. He lifted his gaze, slow, as if he was reading every detail of her face, searching for cracks. He looked at the way her lashes trembled, the way her knuckles tightened around the bouquet, the way her shoulders stayed lifted, rigid, like she was bracing for impact. And then he did something that made the entire room hold its breath. He stepped closer. Not aggressively. Not threateningly. Just close enough for only her to hear him. Close enough that the scent of him, cold air, expensive cologne, something sharp and clean, invaded the space she thought was protected. Her smile widened as her fear grew, like two forces fighting over her mouth. His voice dropped. "You're not supposed to be here." Her eyes flashed then, quick anger cutting through panic. "Neither are you." That was the moment people started to realize the bride wasn't the one in control. She was just the one pretending hardest. The groom stepped forward again, voice louder now, desperate to be heard. "Hey! Back away from my wife." The word wife sounded like a mistake the second it left his mouth. Because the Mafia boss finally looked at him. And the groom's face drained of blood. Not because he recognized him. Because he recognized the consequence in his eyes. The boss turned back to the bride, expression tightening into something almost painful, almost human, like he was trying to decide which memory to believe. Like he was trying to remember if she had begged him, or if she had warned him. Then he spoke her name, not the name written on the wedding program, not the name the officiant had announced, a different name, a name the guests had never heard, a name that didn't belong in this ballroom. Yuna. The bride's bouquet slipped slightly in her grip, her smile finally faltered, just for a second, like her face had forgotten how to lie. The room reacted instantly. Confusion, shock, murmurs that rose like heat. The groom snapped. "What did you just call her?" But the bride didn't answer, she couldn't. Because that name wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She stared at the Mafia boss like he'd reached inside her chest and grabbed the one thing she had hidden perfectly. Her voice came out thin, careful. "Don't." The boss's eyes narrowed. "That's you. I'd know it anywhere." She forced her smile back into place, turning her face toward the guests like she was performing again, like she could still save it. But her breath was uneven now, her eyes were glassy, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't for the crowd, it was for him, a whisper so small it felt like a confession. "You promised," her lips trembled. "You'd never find me." The bride didn't move when the Mafia boss said her old name. But her body did something her smile couldn't control. It recoiled, just a fraction, like his voice wasn't a memory, but a hand reaching for her throat. For a second the ballroom disappeared. All she could hear was the past. The night she stopped being the bride. The night she stopped being anyone the world could find. Flashes hit her like broken glass. A narrow hallway soaked in yellow light, bare feet on cold tile, a door that wouldn't open no matter how hard she pulled, men laughing somewhere behind her. Too close, too calm, and then his voice. Not raised, not emotional, just certain. "Open the door." Fear rearranged her organs. It turned her hands useless. It made her brain scream one word over and over. "Run." Another flash, stairwell, sharp winter wind slapping her face, breath coming out in white panic, a coat too big for her shoulders, someone's phone pressed into her hand. "Don't call anyone you used to know," a woman hissed. "Not even once." She nodded even though she didn't understand, because understanding didn't matter. Surviving did. Another flash. Cheap motel room, peeling wallpaper, hair cut shorter and uneven with trembling scissors in a bathroom mirror, an ID burned in a metal sink until the plastic curled like skin. Her name erased. She stared at herself that night and didn't recognize the girl looking back. Not because she looked different, but because her eyes looked dead. She never told anyone what happened. Not the police. Not a friend. Not even the priest she visited once just to feel like God might still see her. Because the truth was simple. When men like him want you gone, you either disappear, or you become a headline no one dares to read out loud. Back in the ballroom, the groom was speaking again, voice sharp with humiliation. "What is this? Who is he? Why is he calling you that name?" He reached for her instinctively, possessively, like she was a thing on his arm, a symbol he'd paid for. The Mafia boss watched that small gesture with a stillness that felt dangerous. The bride's lips parted, but no sound came. Her chest rose too fast. She could feel the eyes on her like heat. This wasn't just scandal anymore. It was exposure. The groom took her wrist and turned slightly so the guests could see her face, demanding answers. "Tell them. Right now. Tell them you don't know him." Her smile wavered again and she truly tried to hold it together. But the truth was heavier than silk. The groom didn't know what he was touching. He didn't know the old bruises her skin still remembered. He didn't know her flinch was trained, automatic, carved into her like a reflex. She inhaled, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I told you," she said quietly. "This isn't the place." The groom's eyes narrowed. Not understanding but hearing something worse than guilt. Not innocence. Evasion. "You said you grew up in Busan," he snapped. "You said your parents died. You said you never." He stopped mid-sentence. Because she didn't deny it. She didn't correct him. She just stared ahead like a woman bracing for collapse. The groom looked around at the guests, trying to salvage his pride with laughter, but his face was sweating now. "You're all seeing this, right? This is insane. She's... He turned back to her, voice breaking into disbelief. Who are you? That question hit harder than the Mafia boss's name. Because she'd been asking herself the same thing for years. The Mafia boss stepped closer, close enough that the cameras couldn't capture what was happening inside her eyes. His voice came out like a blade sliding slowly. You lied to him, he said. The groom snapped. She's my fiancée. The boss didn't blink. No, he corrected calmly. She's your illusion. Her throat tightened, because she knew what came next. When lies are exposed in rooms like this, men don't ask gently. They grab. Someone grabbed her arm. Not the boss. The groom's hand tightened on her wrist, fingers digging in with sudden anger, sudden ownership, and she flinched so hard the bouquet almost fell. Full body flinch. The kind that doesn't come from surprise. Comes from history. The room saw it. The guest saw it. And the Mafia boss saw it like a match hitting gasoline. His eyes darkened. Not with jealousy. With recognition. With something terrifyingly close to guilt. And the bride realized in that single second, the past wasn't just awake anymore. It was walking toward her. The groom didn't let go of her wrist. If anything, his fingers tightened, as if pain could force honesty out of her. He stared at the Mafia boss like a man refusing to be embarrassed in front of a room full of rich friends and expensive cameras. Like pride was a shield. Like anger was protection. This is my wedding, the groom said loudly, his voice cracking at the edges. You don't walk in here and call my fiancé some stranger's name. The guests were frozen in their seats, holding their champagne flutes like they might need them to breathe. Someone's phone was already recording, trembling slightly in their hand. The priest stood stiff beside the altar, Bible still open, mouth closed like he'd forgotten how to speak. The bride tried to pull her wrist back. The groom didn't allow it. He wanted control. And he wanted it now. The Mafia boss looked at the groom's hand on her arm the way a surgeon looks at infection, quietly deciding what needed to be removed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. That calm was worse than a threat. She's shaking, the boss said, soft enough that only the front row could hear. You're still holding her. The groom scoffed, forced a laugh. Came out wrong. She's fine, he snapped. She's just confused. Because some lunatic walked in here. He stepped forward, one step too close, tilting his chin like he was the kind of man who handled danger every day. Like he wasn't sweating through his suit. Listen, the groom said, lowering his voice as if that made him powerful. I don't know who you are. And I don't care. You're going to leave right now before I have my security. He glanced toward the side of the ballroom. Toward the guards. Except the guards weren't moving. They weren't even blinking. They were staring at the Mafia boss with the kind of fear that didn't belong in a wedding hall. The groom noticed it. And for the first time, hesitation slipped across his face. But pride pushed it away quickly. He turned back to the bride, yanking her a little closer like she was proof he still mattered. What's your problem? He whispered harshly at her, but the microphone picked it up anyway. Did you bring him here? Is this some sick joke? Her eyes went glassy. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Because her lungs were busy trying not to collapse. The Mafia boss finally looked up, straight at the groom, like he'd allowed the boy his final sentence out of mercy. Let her go, he said. Not a request. Not a warning. A verdict. The groom's jaw clenched. Or what? For one brutal second, silence swallowed the room. Then the Mafia boss's gaze slid to the groom's father sitting front row, an older man with money on his face and fear behind his eyes. Chairman Seo, the boss said, calm as prayer. Your son doesn't know who I am. But you do. The father didn't speak. His hands were clasped so tight they looked painful. The bride's stomach dropped. So it wasn't just her past here. It was his too. The groom blinked. Dad! No answer. The groom's anger turned desperate. What is this? Why is everyone acting like? The Mafia boss lifted his hand slightly. That was all. A man in a black suit near the entrance touched an earpiece, then moved. Then another. Then another. The soft music that had been playing, violins, romance, lies, cut off instantly. The speakers died so suddenly it felt like someone had ripped the heart out of the room. A collective inhale swept through the guests. The doors at the back of the ballroom locked with a deep, mechanical click. One after another. Blick, blick, blick. The bride felt her skin go cold. The groom finally released her wrist. Not because he chose to, but because his fingers went numb. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, voice rising. "You can't lock people in." The Mafia boss walked forward slowly, stopping at the aisle where the bride stood trembling in white silk. He didn't touch her. That was the most terrifying part. His eyes held hers with a weight that felt like history pressing down. Then he spoke, quiet, controlled, and absolute. "Nobody leaves," he said, "until I get the truth." And the bride understood with a sick drop in her chest. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a courtroom. And he had already decided who was guilty. Her throat felt too small for the air she needed. The veil was still pushed back, pinned like an afterthought, but nothing about this moment felt like a wedding anymore. Felt like exposure. Like every secret she'd wrapped inside lace and vows was being torn open in front of strangers who didn't even know her real name. The groom stood beside her, frozen now, finally understanding he had stepped into something bigger than his money, bigger than his pride. The bride didn't look at him. She couldn't. Because the man in front of her wasn't watching her like a guest. He was watching her like a storm that had found the thing it lost. The Mafia boss didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply waited, and somehow that made it worse. The room was silent except for the shaking breath she couldn't control. Her hands gripped the bouquet until the stems pressed into her skin. Pain was easier than panic. The boss's men stayed near the walls like shadows, quiet enough to pretend they weren't there, present enough to remind everyone that they were. Her knees felt weak. Not because she was fragile. Because her body remembered him before her mind could lie. She had spent years training herself to forget. She had changed her hair, her voice, her walk. She had practiced smiling in mirrors until it looked real. She had rebuilt herself in pieces, one careful day at a time, like a woman stitching skin over a wound that never fully closed. And now he stood here, undoing all of it with one calm sentence. The guests stared like she was entertainment, like her fear was just another scene. Some of them were curious. Some were horrified. None of them understood the one thing that mattered. She wasn't scared because he found her. She was scared because he hadn't killed her the first time. Because she knew what it meant when a man like him didn't finish a job. The groom's mother whispered something sharp under her breath. The bride barely heard it. Her heart was pounding too loud. The Mafia boss stepped a fraction closer, close enough that she could smell the cold on his coat, close enough that her nerves flared like sparks. "You should sit," he said, not kindly, not cruelly. Just like he was speaking to someone he owned the right to address. She swallowed. "I'm fine," came out weak. The groom started to speak again, but the bride lifted her hand slightly, stopping him. It wasn't bravery. It was exhaustion. Years of running had taught her the truth. Some dangers don't chase. They wait. She turned her head and stared at the rows of faces, the lights, the flowers, the luxury. All of it looked like safety. All of it was just decoration. This marriage was never about romance. Not fully. It had been about escape. About hiding in the most public place possible, wrapped in money and respectability, hoping no one would question the girl who looked like she belonged. She had chosen a man with a clean name and a loud family because she thought loud meant untouchable. Because she thought wife was a shield. She had told herself she could learn to love him. She had even wanted to try. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She had married him because she couldn't sleep anymore without locks. She had married him because she needed witnesses. She had married him because she was tired of being alone with her fear. The Mafia boss watched her stare into the crowd, as if he could see the memories moving behind her eyes. "Talk," he said softly. The bride's lips parted. Nothing came out. Then she forced it. I didn't disappear because I wanted to hurt you. A small murmur ran through the guests. The groom flinched like he'd been slapped. Hurt me? The boss repeated, almost amused. She laughed once, sharp and broken. You think I was free to hurt you? Her voice trembled, but the anger inside it was real. You were the one with power. I was just alive. She looked at him then. Really looked. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened, like the words landed somewhere deep. I rebuilt myself, she said, breath unsteady. I worked. I hid. I survived. I told myself if I kept moving, I would outlive the past. Her fingers loosened around the bouquet. It slid slightly in her grip. But I wasn't supposed to survive. The room seemed to tilt. The groom's father's face drained of color. The priest's hand shook over the Bible. Even the guards at the walls shifted, like they felt the weight of that confession. The bride's voice dropped to a whisper. That night, I should have died. The Mafia boss took one more step forward. Close enough now that she could feel the heat of him against the cold air. He leaned in, his voice low, almost intimate. Not romantic. Dangerous. Then tell me, he murmured. Who made sure you didn't? She felt her lungs freeze. His gaze held hers like a blade. And when he asked the next question, it landed like a gunshot in a silent room. Who helped you escape me? The bride didn't answer. She couldn't. Not because she was stubborn, but because the truth was a loaded gun, and she had spent years keeping the safety on. The Mafia boss watched her struggle in silence, and the longer she hesitated, the colder the air became. Around them, guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering under their breath like gossip could protect them from what was happening. The groom looked between them like a man realizing his own wedding had turned into someone else's war. Say something, he demanded, trying to sound in control, trying to sound like the kind of man people listen to. But even his voice knew it was lying. The bride finally looked at him. In her eyes was apology, fear, and something worse. Regret. Because she had dragged him into this without meaning to. The Mafia boss spoke before she could. This isn't about you, he said to the groom calmly, almost lazily. The insult wasn't in his tone. It was in the truth. The groom's jaw tightened. You show up here and stop my wedding, and you think it's not about me? The boss's gaze shifted to him like a blade turning. If it was about you, he said softly, you would already be on your knees. Silence snapped through the room. The groom's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The bride's fingers trembled at her side. She knew that tone. It wasn't anger. It was restraint. The kind that only existed when violence was already decided but not yet delivered. She forced herself to breathe. Why are you doing this? She asked the boss, and her voice cracked just slightly. You found me. You proved it. So why aren't you satisfied? The Mafia boss didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved around the venue, past the flower arrangements, past the sparkling chandeliers, past the wide glass windows where the night pressed against the building like a watcher. He wasn't admiring the luxury. He was measuring angles, distance, exits, blind spots. He looked like a man standing inside a trap he'd recognized too late. The bride's stomach tightened. You didn't come here just to humiliate me, she whispered. The boss's gaze returned to her. For the first time, there was something there that didn't look like ownership. It looked like calculation mixed with something sharper. Concern. And that frightened her more than rage ever could. No, he admitted, voice low. I didn't come for revenge. A ripple of shock moved through the guests. The groom blinked, confused. The bride felt her heart lurch like the floor shifted under her. Then why? She asked. The boss took one step closer, not enough to touch her, just enough to make the air feel smaller. Because you're not safe, he said. Not here. Not with him. Not with anyone who thinks money and cameras can stop men who don't care about either. The bride's lips parted. What are you talking about? His expression darkened. You think you ran from me, he said quietly. But you ran from the wrong shadow. Her blood went cold. She could feel the memory rising. The screaming, the sirens, the wet smell of blood in the rain, the way she'd been pulled into a car by hands that weren't gentle. She had survived that night by luck, by timing, and by one person who broke the rules to get her out. Someone she never saw clearly. Someone she never thanked. Someone she never found. The boss's voice dropped, almost a whisper meant only for her. The people who wanted you dead back then, he said. They never stopped looking. The bride swallowed hard. That's impossible. No, he corrected, calm and deadly. It's inevitable. She felt her knees weaken. Her instinct screamed to step back, but she didn't move. The groom stepped forward, anger returning as fear disguised itself as pride. Get away from her, he snapped. Whatever fantasy this is. It's not a fantasy, the boss cut in. And then softer to the bride. They're here. Her eyes darted. Where? He didn't answer. He didn't have time. The sound came like thunder snapping in half. Sharp crack. A violent burst of splintering wood. Something exploded near the altar. One of the decorative pillars shattered, sending white petals and dust into the air. Gus screamed. Someone dropped to the floor. The priest stumbled backward, shaking. The groom's mother shrieked. The bride froze for half a second too long, until the Mafia boss moved. His hand grabbed her wrist with brutal precision, pulling her down and into him. Not gentle. Not romantic. Survival. He shielded her with his body, turning his shoulder toward the eyes scanning like a predator. Another crack echoed, but this time it was distant, like a message sent and received. The bride's breath came in broken gasps. Her veil slipped sideways, hanging off her hair. Her bouquet hit the floor and rolled. The groom shouted her name, reaching, but one of the boss's men shoved him back without effort. The bride stared up at the Mafia boss, her face pale, her voice trembling. What was that? His jaw clenched. His eyes didn't soften, but his grip tightened like he was promising something without saying it. Then he leaned close enough that only she could hear. They found you, he said. And for the first time that night, the bride understood the real reason he stopped the wedding. Not to take her back. Not to punish her. But because the moment she said, I do, she would have died. The first shot didn't kill anyone. That was the point. It wasn't an assassination. It was an announcement. For one heartbeat, the wedding hall froze in disbelief. Like every guest was waiting for someone to laugh and admit it was a sick prank. Then panic arrived all at once. Chairs scrape. Champagne glasses shattered. The string quartet stopped mid-note, bows hovering in the air like broken wings. The bride's breath came fast and sharp under the Mafia boss's arm. He didn't let her stand fully. He kept her low, his body angled like a shield. But what stunned her wasn't the gunshot. It was what happened after. There was no screaming from him. No barking orders. No rage. Just movement. Silent. Perfect. His men appeared as if they'd been waiting in the walls. Black suits. Earpieces. Hands near their jackets. They didn't push guests roughly. They guided them, redirected them, closed lines of sight. It looked almost polite, until you realized they were controlling the room like a lock snapping shut. The groom staggered near the altar, pale, trying to breathe through shock and humiliation at the same time. What the hell is going on? He shouted, voice cracking. This is my wedding. The Mafia boss didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the far end of the hall, on the tall glass windows where the night stared back. Not anymore, he muttered. The bride's fingers clutched his sleeve without permission. She hated herself for it. She hated that her body trusted him before her mind could catch up. Outside, the snow kept falling like nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. A second sound came, different from the gunshot. Soft click. A door locking. Then another. The bride lifted her head slightly, eyes darting to the entrance. It was sealed. The side doors too. She watched the staff being ushered into a corner like furniture. The guests were herded away from the windows. She swallowed hard. Was this planned? The mafia boss finally glanced at her. His eyes weren't cruel. They were razor-sharp, calculating. Either your wedding was the perfect hiding place, he said, or someone wanted you surrounded when they came for you. Her stomach turned. Surrounded by witnesses, she whispered. Surrounded by leverage, he corrected. Across the hall, one of his men pressed a hand to his earpiece, listening. His face tightened. Then he nodded once, small, grim. The mafia boss's gaze darkened. The bride felt it like a temperature change. What? She asked quickly. Tell me what's happening. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he raised 2 fingers, barely a gesture, and instantly the room rearranged itself. His men moved the guests further back. Someone flipped the lights lower. The center aisle cleared like an invisible threat had claimed it. The bride's heart hammered so hard it hurt. Who are they? The mafia boss's voice dropped. People who don't miss twice. The groom, still near the altar, stepped forward like pride could stop bullets. He pointed at the boss. You did this. You brought this here. The bride flinched. Not from the groom's shouting. From the sound of footsteps behind him. 2 men in dark uniforms that weren't police, too clean, too silent, came from a side corridor. Their faces were blank. Their eyes were cold. The groom turned too late. A hand clamped over his mouth. Another arm hooked around his throat. In 3 seconds he was dragged backward, his expensive tuxedo twisting, his shoes scraping the marble as he fought to stand. The bride's breath left her body in a single broken sound. No! The mafia boss moved instantly, but he didn't rush blindly. He shifted the bride behind him, one palm pressing her down like a command. His men stepped forward, forming a wall. Guns didn't appear yet, but danger did, thick and present. The groom's muffled cries turned into choking panic. One of the attackers pressed something hard against his ribs. Blade. Not a gun. Message. The room erupted into chaos again. Guests sobbing, people collapsing behind tables, wedding planners screaming into dead phones. But the bride didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes stayed on the groom as he was pulled into the shadows near the back exit. Her lips trembled. Please. The mafia boss leaned close to her ear, voice dangerously calm. Don't run toward him, he warned. Then what do I do? She whispered, tears burning her eyes. Just watch. His jaw tightened. You survive. The bride shook her head violently. He doesn't deserve this. He married someone they came to erase, the boss cut in. That's the price. A sob ripped out of her. Hyun! She screamed the groom's name, voice cracking across the hall. The groom's eyes found hers for 1 second. Pure fear. Pure betrayal. The bride took 1 step forward. Then another. But her feet didn't carry her to the groom. They carried her to the mafia boss. She grabbed the front of his suit like it was the only thing between her and death. Do something, she begged. Please, do something. The mafia boss stared down at her, cold power wrapped in restraint. Then he said quietly like an oath, I will. And the bride realized what she'd just done. She screamed her groom's name, but she ran toward the man everyone feared. The groom's muffled cries faded behind the wall as the attackers dragged him deeper into the corridor. The wedding hall didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a crime scene that hadn't finished happening. Guests stayed crouched behind tables, clutching each other, whispering prayers into trembling hands. The string lights above the altar kept glowing softly, as if the room was trying to pretend it was still romantic. The bride stood in the center aisle, shaking so badly she could hear her jewelry clicking against her skin. And the Korean mafia boss, cold, unmoving, was the only person who looked like he had expected the night to turn ugly. His men formed a wide perimeter, bodies positioned with brutal discipline. Nobody touched her. Nobody even spoke to her without his permission. She hated that. She hated how protective it felt. She hated how familiar it felt. The boss stepped slightly in front of her, still shielding her from the corridor where the groom disappeared. "We need to move," he said. His voice was low, controlled, like calm could erase panic if he used enough of it. The bride didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the corridor. "That's my husband," she whispered, like the word was supposed to mean something stronger than fear. The boss didn't answer immediately. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her. He just watched her face the way predators watch wounded animals. Not to strike, but to measure how long before they collapse. "You can go after him," he said at last, tone almost neutral. "But you won't come back." The bride's throat tightened. "You're acting like you care," she snapped, louder than she meant to. "Why?" His gaze cut to hers. "Because this started the moment you walked into that room wearing white." "No," she whispered. "This started years ago." The boss's expression didn't change, but the air around him did. Like a door had opened somewhere inside him. The bride took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, trying to stand like the woman she was pretending to be all day. "I didn't want you to find me," she said, voice breaking on the last word. "I didn't want any of this." "And yet," he murmured, eyes sharp, "you chose a wedding." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I chose safety." The boss gave a faint exhale that could have been a laugh, if it wasn't too tired to be one. "There is no safety," he said. "There are only cages with different keys." The bride swallowed hard. She looked around the hall, at the guests, at the staff, at her own bridal bouquet still lying near the altar like a dropped lie. Then she looked down at her ring. It glittered under the lights, beautiful and meaningless. "If I go after him," she whispered, "they'll kill him." The boss didn't deny it. His silence was an answer sharper than words. "And if I don't," she started. She didn't finish. Because she already knew what the world would call her. Traitor. Heartless. Monster. The bride's breathing turned uneven. "Why do I feel safe near you?" she asked, her voice turning smaller. "Why does my body do that?" The boss's eyes narrowed slightly, as if the question offended him. Or wounded him. "Because you remember," he said. "Even if you try not to." Her chest tightened. Memory wasn't soft for her. Memory was blood on tile floors. It was a hand over her mouth. It was her name being said like a threat. "What did you do to me?" she demanded, tears finally spilling over. "Tell me what you did long ago." The boss's jaw flexed once. His men shifted slightly, tense, hearing the emotion in her voice and misunderstanding it as danger. But he lifted one hand, one simple gesture, and they froze again. He stepped closer, and the bride couldn't stop herself from stepping back. Her heels caught on the edge of a fallen chair. The boss reached out, not to grab her but to steady her. His touch was barely there. It was restraint disguised as kindness. "I didn't break you," he said softly. "But I didn't stop it fast enough." Her breath hitched. A scream built in her throat, but it didn't come out. Because the truth landed in her chest like a stone. "Then why did I run from you?" she whispered. His gaze didn't flinch. "Because I was the kind of man you don't survive twice." The bride's lips trembled. She turned her head toward the corridor again, where the groom was taken. "I have to help him," she insisted, even as her voice betrayed her. "I have to." "You don't," the boss interrupted. Not harsh. Worse. Certain. "He isn't innocent." The bride froze. "What did you say?" His eyes stayed on hers like he was daring her to deny it. "You heard me." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "No," she shook her head. "He saved me." "He used you," the boss corrected. "The same way everyone does when they learn what you're worth." The bride's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her dress until it wrinkled. She stared at him like he was the devil trying to rewrite her reality. "You don't know him," she whispered. The boss leaned closer, voice dropping low enough that nobody else would hear it. "Then say it," he murmured. "Say why you married him." The bride's eyes widened. Her breath stopped, Her silence answered before she could. The boss's gaze turned darker, not with anger, something sharper, something pitying. "You married him," he whispered, "because he threatened you." And the bride realized she wasn't deciding between two men anymore. She was deciding which truth would destroy her first. The bride didn't cry loudly. She didn't collapse the way people expected broken women to collapse. She just stood there, in the middle of a ruined wedding, with her veil half torn and her lipstick fading like the last trace of the person she tried to become around them. The hall had gone quiet again. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone is waiting to see which life ends next. The Korean Mafia boss kept his stance steady, shoulders squared, eyes scanning exits and shadows. Like he could already hear danger breathing behind the walls, his men moved like ghosts between the tables, guiding the guests away from open spaces, locking down entrances, checking corners, and still. His attention kept returning to her. Not like a man staring at a bride. Like a man staring at a mistake he never stopped paying for. The bride finally took a slow step forward. Stopping just outside of his reach, her voice came out flat, controlled. "You said you didn't break me." His gaze met hers. "I didn't. But you didn't stop it fast enough," she continued, each word cutting deeper than any scream. "That's what you said." He didn't blink, he didn't soften it with excuses. Yes. The simplicity of it hit her harder than denial would have. She looked past him. Toward the corridor where her groom had been taken, the sound of distant shouting had faded, replaced by muffled movement and an ugly stillness, the kind that suggested the situation was no longer just a kidnapping. She swallowed. Then she turned back to the Mafia boss. "You came here acting like you were saving me," she said. "But you're not my hero." His jaw tightened. "I never said I was." Her laugh was small, bitter, almost embarrassed. "Good," she whispered. "Because I'm tired of men pretending they're doing things for me when they're really doing it for themselves." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame, hard to tell with men like him. The bride stepped closer. Close enough that the warmth of his body reached her through the cold air of the hall. "You want the truth," she said. "Then hear mine." He didn't move, so she spoke anyway. "I didn't marry him because I loved him," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling for the first time. "I married him because I was tired of running, because I needed a name that would stop people from asking questions, because I thought a ring would make the world leave me alone." She lifted her hand and stared at the diamond like it was something poisonous. "And I thought, if I became someone else completely, then you would stop existing in my life." His expression didn't change, but the air around him did. He wasn't shocked, was familiar with it, like he had always known he was the shadow she couldn't outrun. The bride lowered her hand again. "And now you're here," she whispered. "At the exact moment I thought I was safe." "I came because you weren't safe," he replied. "No," she cut in immediately, eyes sharp. "You came because you couldn't stand the idea of me being safe without you." His gaze darkened, but he didn't deny it. That silence was the closest thing to a confession she would ever get. The bride's throat tightened again, but she forced her voice steady. "You've done terrible things," she said. "I know that. I remember enough to know I'm not imagining it." His eyes didn't shift away. "I don't deny my darkness," he said calmly. "Denying it would be insulting." That made her flinch, because it wasn't the words that scared her, it was the honesty. The bride took a shaky breath. "I'm not here to ask you to change," she said. "And I'm not here to forgive you." His face didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you want, then?" She stared at him like she was about to rip out the last piece of herself that still needed him. "One thing," she said, his hand flexed at his side, slow and controlled, like he already felt the weight of her demand before she spoke it. She swallowed. "Let me go," she whispered. "For real." For a second, the boss didn't answer, and in that silence, the bride realized she had made a kind of peace, not with him, with herself, because if he said no, she would know she had never been free, and if he said yes, she would finally stop being someone's possession. The Mafia boss stared at her, long enough that the room started to feel colder. Then he stepped closer, voice dropping low enough to be hers alone. "If I let you go tonight," he said, quiet as snowfall, "you'll die before sunrise." And the bride's heart stopped, because she knew he wasn't threatening her, he was warning her. The first light of dawn didn't feel warm. It slid through the shattered stained glass windows like a witness. silent, cold and unavoidable. The wedding hall looked nothing like the dream it had been built to sell. Chairs were overturned, white flowers lay crushed under footprints, champagne flutes glittered on the floor like broken promises. Outside, police sirens echoed far away. But none of them came close, not to this place, not to him. The Korean Mafia boss stood near the altar, jacket still, perfectly sitting on his shoulders, but his eyes were different now. Like something inside him had shifted and refused to return to its old place. His men had done what they always did. Cleaned quietly, erased loudly, controlled everything that could be controlled, bodies removed before cameras arrived, phones taken before stories spread, witnesses guided home with trembling hands and forced smiles. The city would hear a version of tonight. But it would never hear the truth. Because the truth was standing a few steps away from him, barefoot on marble, her wedding dress torn at the hem, her veil missing. Her face calm in the way only exhausted women could be calm, the bride. Not running anymore. Not hiding anymore. Just, finished behind her, the groom sat slumped against a pillar, wrists zip-tied, blood on his lower lip, eyes wide and shattered. Whatever courage he had worn at the beginning of the night had died somewhere between the locked doors and the first gunshot. He wasn't the man he promised to be. He was just another man who thought money could protect him from monsters. The Mafia boss didn't even look at him now. His attention stayed on her, as if the entire ruined ceremony was nothing but background noise. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Come with me." Not a threat, not a command, a request disguised as habit. The bride stared at him for a long moment, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty, not fear, not doubt, something worse, hope. He hated it instantly, because hope was weakness, and she was the only person who could make it bloom inside him like a curse. "You said if you let me go tonight," she murmured. "I'll die before sunrise." "Yes." He didn't soften it, didn't dress it up, didn't pretend it was poetic. She nodded slowly, as if she was letting the words sink into her bones. "And if I stay," she asked, "what happens?" He didn't answer at first because the truth was ugly. If she stayed, she wouldn't die. But she also wouldn't live normally again. There would be guards at her door, names she couldn't say. Lies she couldn't escape, a life that looked like protection from the outside, and felt like a cage from the inside. His mother once told him something when he was younger, before the blood, before the empire, before he learned how to bury his soul. The cruelest men aren't the ones who hurt you. They're the ones who love you wrong. He never understood it until now. The bride took a slow step back. Then another. Her eyes didn't leave his, and that was the cruelest part. No panic, no begging, no fear, just truth. "I didn't survive everything I survived," she said softly, "just to belong to someone again." His jaw clenched. "I'm not asking you to belong to me." Her lips almost curved, but not with humor. "With men like you," she whispered. "Asking isn't always necessary." The wind slid through the broken windows and lifted the torn edge of her dress. She looked less like a bride now and more like a woman walking out of a burning building. Still standing, still breathing, still refusing to collapse. She glanced once toward the groom. He lifted his head like he wanted to speak, but nothing came, because he knew he'd already lost her long before the vows. Then she looked back at the Mafia boss. And for the first time that night, he looked almost human, almost. "I don't forgive you," she said. He nodded. "I know. I don't trust you," she continued. Another nod. "I know. And I don't need you," she finished, voice steady, final. That one hit like a bullet. His eyes darkened, but he didn't move, didn't stop her, didn't reach out, because somewhere deep inside him, the man beneath the monster understood something painful. If he grabbed her now, he would prove her right. The bride turned away. She walked past the broken aisle, past the ruined flowers, past the shattered dream of safety. And when she reached the doors, she didn't hesitate, she didn't look back, she just left. The Mafia boss stayed frozen near the altar, watching the empty doorway like it had taken something vital with it. His men waited for orders. The groom waited for mercy. The city waited for a headline. But the Mafia boss didn't speak. Because the true ending wasn't the gunshots, it wasn't the hostage, it wasn't the chaos, it was the quiet moment after, when dawn arrived. And the one woman he could never own chose herself anyway. He stopped the wedding because he recognized the bride. But what shattered him was realizing she recognized him too, and still chose to leave.